Welcome to Twisted Liquid RC Boats. Good day everyone, and welcome back to Twisted Liquid RC Boats and the continuation in our Zippkits SLR missile Thunderboat build. Today, as you can see on the table, we're going to build the floor or the bottom of our boat. May I say before I start that building the floor and the bottom of the boat is the first step in the manual. Laminating is the second step in the manual. I've done two of those steps in reverse order for no other reason than I had the tight bond first to work with, and then I got to my local hobby shop and picked up some good BSI Bob Smith Industries 30-minute slow cure epoxy. If I'd have had the epoxy first, I would have done the floor first in the order like it is in the manual, but like I say, all I had was the tight bond. I wanted to get started working on the boat. I wanted to get building it. So I skipped ahead to the step number 2 and done the laminating first. That is the only reason that we've done any of this in reverse order. So having said that, today we're going to build our floor. First, may I say, I got the floor laid out on a couple pieces of MDF shelving that are level and completely level on our table. Secondly, we have 4 pieces that we're working with. We have 2 large sheets and we have 2 small nose pieces. None of these pieces are identical. They are all different, and they only can go together in one way. So orientate yourself with the manual and the parts and get them working on a level surface to make your life easy. Now, as you can tell, when we lay these pieces together, we have a little warpage here in our plywood. And that's quite natural for thin plywood. It's not thick. And the reason we're working on MDF is because MDF don't warp unless it gets wet. And if you keep it dry, MDF will stay perfectly flat forever. So this is why we're using our MDF and not plywood as a level working surface for building this boat. These 2 pieces of MDF are going to end up being our building jig also. But right now, the jig is the next step, so we got to get this floor done. We got our laminating done. Once we do a jig, we can start building the frame of our boat. Today, our critical points of interest for building are, we have to sand this edge very lightly before we apply any epoxy to it and join it to the other piece. We have to do the same with all of the edges. Reason being is, as the kit is cut and made by the laser when it's being built and done, the laser leaves a very, very tiny burn on the edge. You will also notice that there are some little tabs that were attached to the sheets that are still feelable with your finger sitting in the wood. We want to eliminate those tabs, and we want to lightly get rid of that laser burn to promote adhesion with the epoxy. This helps big time. I'm not telling you to change the shape of this edge. I'm not telling you to sand it all the way down. I'm telling you to just lightly rub it with sandpaper to remove this laser burn. Once you see the wood going a little bit light in color, you're good. Once you feel the tabs are gone and everything is a smooth edge so it'll fit together perfectly, you are good. Once we get that done and our sanding is complete, we're going to tape these pieces together. We're going to flip this over. We're going to put a seam of tape right down the middle. And that's going to act as a piano hinge for doing the part. What we will do is we'll flip it back over again then, release the cross tape this way. We will lightly separate the joint, separating the 2 edges taped together on the bottom. We will apply our epoxy. We will close up the joint, and we will tape across again as we are building our floor. Like I done with bulkhead number 3, I'm going to break the 4 parts down into 2 steps. I'm going to do the 2 big pieces first. I'm going to weigh them down while the epoxy is curing so that everything stays flat on the joint. Right here. I'm worried about keeping all of this joint right here flat while it is curing on the MDF. After that cures, I'm going to come in, mix up some more epoxy, And I'm going to do the nose piece and attach them together and onto the main piece. But I figure it's just going to be easier to do 2 epoxy mixes, break it up a little bit, and let me get the main parts together and this slight warpage removed from the wood and let it cure. Took a run to my local hardware store. Picked up what's known as some acid brushes. Acid brushes are going to be great for working with when applying the epoxy. It'll be very easy for me just to brush epoxy on both joints with our taped hinge, separate it a little bit, and then just put it all back together. Little container to mix the epoxy in. Before I do use the brush, I'm probably just going to trim some of the bristles off in order to give me less bristle, and that'll give me just a better smoothing surface because the epoxy will be a little bit thick. It's not like paint. Guys, you know the work we got to do? We got some extra clamps in the background in case we need to clamp anything to the MDF. Keep it flat, keep everything lined up. Critical while it's curing that all the slots line up. It's straightforward epoxy wood work together. So having said the steps that we had to walk through, let's get started and let's do it. Step 1 is to sand the edges of both main halves of the floor. I'm using a sanding block, keeping it at a 90-degree angle with the edges. Our main goal here is just to remove the laser burn and any remaining wooden tabs for a perfect fit and good adhesion with our epoxy. Step 2 in our floor assembly. Take some masking tape and run across both pieces of the main floor in a vertical line. I used 8 pieces of masking tape to hold the floor together. Make sure your alignment is good with your slots and make sure that your edges are perfectly square. Step 3. Let's take our floor and being very careful not to separate our tape, we lightly turn it over and lay it back on the MDF. Make sure all your slots are still in alignment. Make sure your floor is sitting flat on the MDF. Now's the time to wiggle it and check and make sure that everything is perfect. You do not want your floor seam to be out of alignment. I took a couple minutes just to move the floor a little bit, wiggle it, push it down, do whatever it took to get in a perfect alignment. Step 4 in our floor assembly is to take some masking tape and place it down the seam between the two pieces of wood. Take your time and make sure that you get the tape flat right across the seam. I used 3 strips of tape down the length of the wood horizontally to join them together on this side. This is going to act as our tape hinge when we flip it back over. You will see shortly why I'm doing so. Step 5. Being careful not to separate the wood, lightly flip it over and lay it on the MDF again. Now, make sure all your alignment and everything is perfect one more time, as the tape is holding the two pieces together. If you gotta wiggle it a little bit, it's no big deal. Lightly roll back the 8 strips of tape that you laid in a vertical line. 4 now. Step 6. Mix up some good 30-minute epoxy. I'm using Bob Smith Industries Slow Cure 30-minute epoxy. This is a recommended product in the manual. You mix it in equal portions and stir it very, very well. Approximately a minute or so is great. After mixing my epoxy very good, it was time to separate the two halves with the tape joint and to lightly glue them together. I used my level underneath at first, but quickly realized that I had to take my hand and hold the piece apart more in order to get the epoxy in the joint. Spread a liberal coating with your brush of epoxy down the seams of both halves. After you have a good coating of epoxy on both seams, lay the floor bottom flat on the MDF again. Take your time and take your vertical tape pieces and pull them back over the two halves. Keep them in as tight as you possibly can in order to avoid warping of the wood and to also bring the two halves together. I clamped it in the back and started working my way forward slowly, pulling the tape across in order to bring the join together. After getting all my vertical tape across the two halves again, I proceeded to use the remaining epoxy I had left, come back in, and lightly brush it over the seam. This is an advisable step as it will add a little extra strength to the joint. After you've finished epoxying your two halves together, check your level, make sure your surface is level. I used some objects that I had laying around to weigh the wood down so it would avoid warping while it was curing. The engine you see in the picture is the one we're going to use in the boat. The sockets I took from my toolbox. I simply wrapped them in some rags and tape as not to get the wood dirty. Clamp everything to the MDF and let it cure. After letting my floor cure completely overnight, step 7 was next. I came in and released the clamps on the floor and released my weighing objects to avoid warping. After I had the floor let loose, I lightly slid it forward and exposed the first piece of tape that I had on the front edge. Next, I sand all of my nose pieces of my floor in order to remove any laser burns from the edging, once again to promote adhesion with the epoxy. Next, take a piece of masking tape or wax paper and place it on the bottom front nose edge. This will prevent you from gluing the floor bottom to your MDF as you're working. Making sure that your two nose pieces are in perfect alignment, take a piece of masking tape and run it in a horizontal line across the seam. This piece of tape will act as our hinge joint for gluing our nose pieces together. Step 8. Mix up some more good 30-minute epoxy in order to glue our nose to our main floor assembly and our two halves together. Once again, I'm using Bob Smith Industries 30-minute slow cure epoxy, and I'm mixing it in equal portions. Make sure that you stir it very well. Lightly separate your two nose pieces on your taped hinge joint and spread a good coat of epoxy in between the seam. This will only take you a little bit to do. Make sure your parts are in alignment and set them aside. Proceed to slide your nose forward on your working surface without dropping your epoxy brush on the floor, and apply a liberal coating of epoxy across the front edge. Take the two nose pieces of your floor that you have taped together and make sure that your edge has no tape on it. Then apply a coat of epoxy to the edge of your nose piece. Slide your main floor working surface back on your MDF. Take the nose piece that you have and place it into the slots. Make sure that you get it completely in place and tight. Clamp your main floor now to your MDF. After everything is in place perfectly, take some epoxy that you may have left in your container and brush it across the joint of the four pieces you are joining together. This will add a little extra strength to these four pieces. tape your nose half to your main half of your bottom floor. This will give you an area to clamp on without gluing everything together. Remember, we're trying to prevent gluing the floor to the MDF. We have a strip of tape across the bottom to prevent this. Now's the time to just tape and clamp your nose and main floor piece however you need to get everything flat and level on the joins and let it cure. Brush any remaining epoxy you may have in your container on the exposed area of your joints for a little extra strength. We now have a flat, level floor surface built with no warpage. The manual recommends that we keep all of the parts taped together until we use it in future assembly. When you're finished letting it cure, just simply release it from the MDF and store it in a safe place. We have our floor built. Catch you in the next episode. Jig and framing next. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe. Take care and stay safe.